nice. We have a full roster of things to talk about tonight. My name is Linda. I'm the library director, just in case we haven't met before. Tonight we have Ross Fisher. He's going to go over ethics training with us, which is so exciting. I'm sure Ross will make it exciting. So thank y'all very much for coming. I'm going to hand it on over.
Thanks. Oh, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Now I'm under pressure to make ethics exciting.
I lowered the bar. It's good.
You lowered it. That's good. I'm Ross Fisher. My law firm serves as city attorney for the City of Buda. I used to be here for every meeting, and then I got banished to Brady, Texas. Do y'all know where that is?
Yes. It's part of the hill country.
They want to be like Buda. They're just not capable of doing it. So now I just come back on special occasions, and I think, and so thanks for having me back. I think this is the first time I've been in this room without Tommy Ford shaking her cane at me. So
Where is Tommy?
Yeah.
She's not on the board or commission.
did she come? I know she did.
Yeah.
Let's talk about ethics. What do we mean when we talk about ethics? Tell me what boards are represented here. I know I see city council members. Who else are here? What board?
Library,
Library board?
Parks and Rec,
Parks and Rec? Library?
Zoning board of adjustment.
Planning, zoning, ZBOA?
PNC.
Okay, good. Well, welcome. You all have to take this training session according to your ethics ordinance. So we're going to go through that. They asked me how much time I needed to talk about ethics, and I can do this for 4 or 5 hours.
Let's do the short course.
Do the short course. I said 2, and they said, what about 2 hours? But if you're good, maybe we can get you home in time for whatever, Dancing with the Stars or whatever it is tonight. Okay, see if I can make this work. No? Linda?
Okay. Just don't move. Stay in,
Don't move,
in
okay.
the screen.
Well, I'm gonna have to. We're also gonna have to read. You think you can do it?
I think we have officially frozen it.
Awesome. All right, so what do we mean when we talk about ethics? What does that mean? I do a lot, I get asked to teach a lot of ethics. Sometimes conflicts of interest, right? People use that interchangeably with ethics. Professional standards of conduct, like rules that govern engineers or attorneys, council members. Ethics sometimes gets used interchangeably with public corruption. Who's read about our governor recently? Right? Are those ethics issues? So when we talk about public corruption that's in the penal code, that sometimes kind of falls under the category of ethics. Self-dealing, breach of duty, all of the above, right? So all of these things are sort of within the general broad category of ethics. So, are you going to work when I do it? So let's talk about, but here's what I want to talk about, because I spent a lot of time talking about rules, and that's, I think, what most people think of ethics. They think of rules, and I've tried to sort of recalibrate my approach to talking about ethics, which is what values are we, why do we have these rules? And what values are we trying to instill or uphold with all these different ethics rules, the conflict of interest rules, the transparency rules. So throw out some values. Tell me what values you think are important.
Honesty.
Honesty? Good, yeah, I'm glad somebody said honesty. What else?
Trust.
Integrity. Trust.
Equality,
Equality.
loyalty,
Loyalty. Good, these are values. What else?
truthfulness,
Truthfulness. What else? Two of the things that we have to study about are open meetings and public information. What do you think? What values are those there to promote?
Transparency.
Transparency. Okay, good. So this is what I want you to kind of think about in these terms. Talk about public confidence. What about independence? Right. I mean, everybody wants their appointed or elected officials to be independent, right? Not subject to some sort of undue influence. So when we talk about these rules, a lot of them will seem formulaic or like math problems. Well, you don't really have a conflict of interest if it's not 10%. So when you find yourself doing that, take a step back and think about, okay, why do we have this rule and what value is it there to promote? And keep those things in mind. That's why these laws were developed the way that they are. And some of them are kind of formulaic, but it's to promote independence, transparency, trust, honesty, loyalty, all the things y'all talked about. So that's great. Keep those in mind, and I tried to list those on one of the slides in your presentation.
I think the phrase used to hear a couple
doesn't pass the smell test. Well, I can figure out a way around the smell test, right? I mean, that's what I spent a few years prosecuting lawyers for a living. That's what I did, was I ran around the state prosecuting lawyers. And there's always a small handful of people who will look for a way around the rules. But, by and large, I think most people want to follow the rules. And if you operate on this, using the smell test, you're usually going to be okay. You were being, that was you, okay. All right, so what are you likely to encounter ethical issues in your city service? Contracting, right, when contracts come to you for review or for approval. Use of public assets or use of public facilities, right? We've got a bond issue going on, and there's strict rules about how public resources can be used with regard to measure elections like that. Acceptance of benefits or gifts, right? Travel and reimbursement issues. Those are really tricky, so we'll talk a little bit about those. And then interaction with colleagues and staff. These are the, this is where we see it in everyday context. Am I right there? Okay. I also want to say that I'm really enjoying that Professor Altmiller is in the audience, because I had him for class at St. Edward University a long, long time ago. And so I've been waiting for this day when I'm going to really enjoy it. All right, next.
Chemical explosion.
And I remember the grades I made for this class. All right, so let's talk about office holder ethics, right? And talk about conflicts of interest. This is one of the things, and just so we'll get to your ordinance in a while, but the ordinance tells us we have to talk about three things: conflicts of interest, open government, the Open Meetings Act, and the Public Information Act, which are transparency related, not really ethics related, but that's the way your ordinance describes them. I put some other stuff in there, just because I want to keep you out of jail, and so if you'll just humor me when I talk about those things. So, conflict of interest, this is the state law, okay? And you have an ordinance that, and we're going to talk about kind of the intersection between state law and your ordinance. Let's start with the big picture and what the state has said. So if a council member has a substantial interest in a business entity or a real property, or not just a council member, but it could be any board member. If you have an interest in real property or a business, and it comes before you, so a substantial interest means that you own 10% of that business, or that business has paid you 10% of your salary for the last year, or you have a fair market value ownership of more than $15,000, and it comes before you, what do you do? Or let's say it's a piece of property and you're on the zoning board of adjustments, and a piece of property, the property next door to you comes up.
You recuse
Yourself, right? Okay, you have a two-step process. The first thing you do is you disclose it. Okay, so you have you fill out an affidavit and you file it with either the board secretary or the city secretary, and you basically publicize that you have this interest in this business. Okay, so that's step one. Step two is to no longer participate. That's what the law says. So stop participating in the matter. So that's where you recuse yourself. Now, what does that mean, not to participate? Can you sit on there and say, oh yeah, this is great, I really like it, yeah, it's awesome, you should really do it because it'd mean a real good deal for me, but I can't vote on it without a conflict of interest. Right? Don't participate. What I tell people is leave the dais if you want to, but you're not supposed to participate at all. And if you violate that, then that's a Class A misdemeanor, so that's $4,000 fine and then a year in jail. So disclose, file that with the city secretary, and don't participate anymore. So let's say it's a piece of real property and it's your property that comes before. Let's say you own a lot in a subdivision, and that subdivision plat comes before the city council, and your lot's worth more than $2,500. Do you have a conflict of interest?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So in that situation, you should disclose it and recuse yourself. Well, here's one that happened with another client, but I use this example a lot. I had a former client where one of my newly elected council members, her sole means of income was working for the garbage company as a salesperson for the garbage company. And the garbage company had the exclusive contract with that city to go pick up the solid waste, right? So she worked for the garbage company, and she got elected to city council. So what happens 9 months down the road when the garbage contract comes up for renewal? Does she have a contract? So let's do the math. First of all, it's her only source of income. So does she have a substantial interest in that business?
Yes.
Right, because it's more than 10% of her annual income. So she has a substantial business interest. What does she do when that contract comes up?
Inform everybody.
Informs everybody, says that I have a substantial interest by virtue of the fact that this is my employer, and then files out with the city secretary, and then steps down. The other, and just sort of philosophically, let me tell you, what I've learned over the years is conflict of interest is people, I get asked that question more than any other question ever. Is that a conflict of interest, Ross? And it's usually somebody asking about somebody, like something doesn't smell right, but it's somebody that you don't like, right? Is that a conflict of interest? That kind of stinks, and she's a bad person. It's usually like, if it's Bobby, I go, well, no, he wouldn't do anything wrong. I've known him. He's great. No, he's a little stinky, but he's a good guy. I know he'd do it right. And so it's usually about somebody that you distrust. And so I get that question a lot. And what I try to tell people is that having a conflict of interest is not improper. It's not a problem. It's not illegal. It's not a reflection on you. It's where you have an issue is, do you handle the conflict of interest properly? Okay? So having it is okay. Just, the law anticipates that conflicts of interest are going to arise. Where you can potentially get in trouble is if you don't handle it properly. So just keep that in mind. Don't be worried about having a conflict of interest. Be worried about not handling it properly. All right, so possible criminal consequences. Also, if you're like the deciding vote, then it could undo the council action. Let's say you go ahead and vote on something, and it's a 3-2 vote, and you cast a vote for it, then you subject the council's action to nullification. We don't want that. Okay? Questions about conflicts of interest? That's a statutory one. All right, we got that. All right, so this is sort of a kind of a spin-off of the conflicts of interest, and it has to do with relationships about vendors. And so if you have, let's take my garbage person, that's not a nice term. Let's take my council member who works for the garbage company. So the law requires public officials to disclose relationships that they may have with vendors that want to do business with the city. It puts a burden on the vendor, so like when the city staff sends out the RFP, they'll always include this questionnaire for the vendor to say, do you have a business relationship with any member of the council? And so they're under an obligation to disclose that, but so is the council member of the board member. So it only applies to council members and the city manager, statutorily, but the city can impose it on other people within the city infrastructure if they want, within the local trust. So if you have a business relationship is very broadly defined. It's a relationship is a connection based on commercial activity. It excludes certain things like if you just walk in, let's see what it says. The transaction conducted at a price and terms available to the public. But let me just give you a real world example. So, councilwoman gets elected. She works for the garbage company. Now she's an elected official. She has a business relationship with a vendor, right, that wants to do or does business with the city. At that point, they both have an obligation to go down to the city secretary and disclose that. So the garbage company, who I don't care about because they're not my client, has an obligation to go down to the city secretary and file a thing that says we have a relationship with this newly elected council member. The newly elected council member has to do the same thing. She has to go down to the city secretary and say, I have a relationship with this business entity that does business with the city. Okay? If they do that within 7 days of becoming aware of their obligation to do it, they're good. It's disclosed, it's out there. The public policy is that the public knows about this and everybody's on notice. Okay? And if they don't do it, it's a Class C misdemeanor. So it's a fine on the offense if they don't do it. So those are kind of the two. The conflict of interest and the vendor relationship sort of go hand in hand. Those are the things that are in the local government code that govern conflicts. Okay? We can check that off our list. All right. What's next? Okay, we'll move on. All right, nepotism. We don't have to dwell on this for too long. This is a state law, so it applies to relationships within the 3rd degree of blood or the 2nd degree of marriage. And I'll tell you, they make charts. I bet, Kristen, do you have a nepotism chart?
I do. We do it on our employee handbook.
You have it in your employee handbook, good, because I can never really explain what the second degree of consanguinity, third degree of consanguinity or second degree of marriage is. I'll tell you a story that one time I got asked by a client when I was in-house city attorney to do a nepotism, saying, well, can we hire this person who's a violation of the nepotism statute? And I did it, and I kept coming up with a different answer than the HR director. And we did it again, and we both had a separate answer. She was using charts from like 1977, and they changed the law. The law gets changed periodically, right? And so it had been changed, so make sure your nepotism charts are up to date. But the public, this is the bottom line, a public official cannot appoint, confirm, or vote to appoint or confirm an individual if that individual will be paid directly or indirectly with public funds, and is related to the public official within a prohibited degree, okay? Or is related to, this is the killer, is related to another member of the appointing body within the prohibited degree. So this isn't one where you can recuse yourself and everything's cool, right? So let's say I'm the mayor, or let's say I'm a council member. Not all mayors get to vote. So let's say I'm a council member and I want my daughter to be the city manager, right? So that's a problem, right? So can I say, I recuse myself, y'all go ahead, and can the rest of the council vote to appoint her as the city manager?
No.
No, because the prohibition applies to everybody. Nobody on the governing body can vote to appoint the relative of another member of the governing body. Why do you think it's that way?
Somebody did it in the past.
Yeah, because it'd then be easy because we just take turns hiring each other's kids, right? I just sit this one out, and you sit that one out, and she sits that one out, and we just do that. And there's even a provision in the law that says you can't do it like among different governing bodies. It can't be like the school district goes, yeah, we'll hire your kid, and then the city says, we'll hire the superintendent's wife. Trade-off. Can't do that either.
Is that law?
Huh?
Is that law or just good practice?
That's law. It actually anticipates like two governing bodies doing the old switcheroo.
Okay, well, how can the school district hire the superintendent's wife?
How they do that? Here's the deal. If it's not a superintendent hiring the wife, I think they could do that. If it's a school board,
Doesn't depend on who the supervisor
it
is.
depends on who the supervisor is. And so I think that if you had a governing body that wanted to hire the superintendent's wife, they might be able to do that. The superintendent could not hire his wife to work at a school district, but a governing body maybe.
Well, how about if a relative of an employee gets elected? Does that relative have to lose their job?
Good question. Depends. Not usually. So what the statute says is there's an exception for prior existing employment. And so in a city, usually the rule is if the employee has been working there for more than 6 months, then they can remain there. They don't have to quit their job. It's stricter for counties, and I've dealt with counties where they've had to cut somebody loose, because the brother gets elected and county commissioner and the brother that's on the road crew has to lose his job. But generally speaking, if the person has been employed there for 6 months, then they can keep their job. But it goes on to say that the newly elected official shouldn't be doing any evaluation of that person, shouldn't be setting salary for that person, should take a separate vote on budgetary matters that might affect their sibling or family members. So it provides some guidance as to, basically they get to keep their job if they've been working there, but the newly elected person has to dial it back and be careful about what they vote on. Good question. The other exception that doesn't matter for us is if there's less than 200 people in town. Then you can just go crazy, I guess. So let me go back to the conflict of interest thing. I'm sorry, I'm backtracking. There's an exception to the conflict of interest deal, right? Disclose, abstain, right? Recuse yourself. That's the rule. The only time you don't have to do that is if a majority of the council and a majority of the board has a conflict. So if everybody has a conflict, it's a free-for-all.
What?
No, what?
Yeah. So let's say you have a council of 5 people, and 3 of them have a conflict of interest. All right? With me? Everybody can vote. If a majority of the board has a conflict of interest, then everybody can vote. So I'm teaching this one time, and somebody said, so theoretically, hypothetically, I could go back and meet with the other city council members, and we could form a landscaping company, all of us, and bid on the landscaping deal, and then we could all vote to award ourselves a landscaping contract, right? And I was like, legally, probably. You don't violate the Green Act. Ethically, let's go back to those values.
So you just have,
Let's go back to those values we were talking about. Huh?
so you just have to have enough relatives on the council, right? I
Well,
mean,
you gotta make all the council members your business partner.
They probably have that issue in Gillespie County and Fredericksburg. My parents lived there, and everybody is related to everyone else. Those old Germans, some of them, they have one T at the end of their name, sometimes two. Sometimes they don't even know their cousins until they meet at a party. It's
Well, and they'd have to be, they'd have to have
Oh, they know their
shared
cousins.
business interest, or they'd have to be related within a certain degree, right? I mean, they have to be within the first degree or
One of
something.
those nice little loopholes.
Well, and so, I've never, ever seen it happen where a majority of a body had conflicts of interest. But I'm telling you, that's the one circumstance when you can vote, when you can have a conflict of interest and vote, is if a majority of your
Wow.
body does it. All right.
But it's not good ethics.
Does it promote those values that we were talking about earlier? Probably not. Okay. What we got next? All right, so this is penal code stuff, which scares people when we start talking about criminal law, but I do want to go through it real fast because it's important. So this is the kind of thing that nobody, well, I want to be careful what I say. Some of these things, you say, well, nobody ever gets indicted for that, unless you're the governor and it happened this summer. So a lot of these things you don't see used a lot, you're starting to see used a lot. So that's why I think it's good to be aware of it. So we're going to talk about, entitled in the penal code, bribery, prohibition on gifts, misuse of confidential information. We'll talk about this. So you can go to the next one. The thing to remember about the penal code is it's got really, really, really broad definitions, right? So a public servant, this is who's a public servant for the purposes of the penal code. Elected officials, got some of those here. All right, appointed officials, got some of those here, your public servants. Officers or employees of government, got some of those here. Attorneys performing governmental function, even though I'm not a city employee, I'm a public servant under the penal code. A candidate for public office. This is my favorite one, is that you cannot even be elected yet and still be a public servant, right? You can be someone who's filed and running for office and still be subject to these laws. Or any person performing a governmental function. So really, really broad definition of who constitutes a public servant. Basically anybody in City Hall. All right, next one. And benefit, also a very broad definition. Anything reasonably regarded as a pecuniary gain or advantage. So anything that's got some sort of monetary advantage. It applies to a public servant's family members. So it's not like if I want to bribe you, I can just go bribe your wife instead, and that's okay. It applies to family members and anybody who give a financial interest in their well-being. It applies to, for bribery, there's no de minimis exception. So it doesn't matter, a bribe can be timed. Go to the next slide, I don't know what this was. A small bribe is as bad as a big bribe, legally. Maybe not, perception-wise. So let's talk about what it means bribery is a two-way offense, right? And so it's bribery to offer a bribe, and it's bribery to ask for or accept a bribe. Same offense. So if you solicit or accept any benefit, no matter how small, right, as consideration for a decision, opinion, or vote, or an act of your official discretion. So if you ask or you receive or you're offered something of value, a benefit, right, in exchange for your act of official discretion, potentially you're looking at bribery. It doesn't matter if it's before the act or after the act. It can be, hey, thanks for doing that for me last week. I appreciate your casting a tie-breaking vote. Here, this is my way of saying thanks. That's potentially a bribe. Y'all see that? It doesn't matter. It can be a coffee mug. Because for bribery, there's no minimum value. Please, if you're going to take a bribe, don't take the coffee mug, right? Go ask for an island or something, some place you can go hide out and don't look cheap. I mean, if you're gonna, corrupt yourself, think big. You don't want to look cheap.
Like a
So-
Rolex,
Huh?
like the Rolex or the,
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
like Governor McDonald?
Like,
you know, he
like
just went
Governor
through-
McDonald,
yeah.
That worked out well for him.
Well,
So, you can't take it, the bottom line on robberies, you can't, and so, fast forward a little bit to your ethics ordinance. Your ethics ordinance basically includes the bribery prohibition in your ethics ordinance. It says you cannot take anything of value in exchange for an act of official discretion, a vote, a recommendation, anything like that. So, I mean, somebody like on P&Z, you might not be voting, I mean, you're making recommendations, right? And so that's still an act of official discretion, it's a recommendation that you're making to city council. So, be aware of that. It's against your ethics ordinance, but that's just small potatoes compared to the fact that, it's a felony under the penal code. Questions about that? Yes, sir.
How does that roll into political campaign donations?
Okay, it kind of does and kind of doesn't. So let's go to the next slide. Bribery can be campaign contributions if offered or solicited in exchange for an act of official discretion. If it's just given to you and you report it, and then it's an exception to gifts, and we're going to talk about gifts, it's okay. But if it's, developer guy, and I said, hey Todd, I'm going to give you this, when you get on city council, I want you to do X, Y, or Z, and then that campaign contribution is conditioned on your decision to do something, then it's potentially bribery. That makes sense? Yeah, so it really turns on the intent and whether or not that is given with the expectation that it influence your official action.
So it has to be an overt statement of intent as opposed to an implied statement of intent.
I think realistically, that's probably right. I mean, you don't see a lot of people contributing money in campaigns for someone they know is going to be against them. Right? Usually it's to some like-minded person. But yeah, there needs to be some sort of quid pro quo proposed. You don't have to do the deal, it can just be the offer or the solicitation. But it needs to be, to prove it, it needs to be more overt than implied.
So the best thing, if that, God forbid, happens to somebody, best thing is to say, no, and then report it.
You report it to who?
Report it to
Like
the
law
city secretary, law
Yeah, you can do
enforcement.
that. Yeah. I mean, that's
That's the safest way to keep you out of trouble, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, if they're really that overt, like someone saying, hey, I want to give you this, but in exchange for, I mean, that's a criminal act. Okay, so,
What's the penalty?
it's a felony, so prison. Yeah.
Okay.
You don't get to choose which prison either, they decide for you. Okay, well, that's enough one. So it can also be a thank you gift. So I used to have this little cup, this little mug, and it had like a cat on it. I said, thank you, I know I can count on you. So it was worth $4. And so if I gave you that and said, hey, thank you, I know I can count on you for voting to approve that subdivision, is that a bribe? Yeah, I mean, maybe. Would your DA indict you? I don't know. How crazy is she or he or whatever? I don't know. I mean, you're rolling the dice at that point. So be careful about that. So we're going to move from bribery into gifts. Bribery, is something given in exchange for official discretion. All right. Y'all aren't going to do that. I know that. But you need to be aware of the gift statute because there are other general rules that have to do with, well, just what can you take, right? So if we go to this one. So the law starts with a general prohibition that says a public servant cannot take anything of value from someone subject to his or her jurisdiction. So what does that mean? Who's subject to your jurisdiction?
the voters.
Everybody in the city is subject to your jurisdiction? Maybe if you're on the city council, if you're on the P&Z, you might be subject to your jurisdiction. Who? Someone seeking plat approval? If you're on ZBOA, you might be subject to your jurisdiction. An applicant seeking relief from the zoning ordinance? Right, so I mean, this is kind of the way to think of it. So if someone's subject to your jurisdiction, the general starting place is they can't give you anything of value, okay? If they're subject to your regulation, inspection, or investigation, if they are suing you or being sued by you, so if you're in a litigation with someone, they can't give you anything of value. If they are interested in a contract, purchase, payment, or claim, they cannot give you anything of value. And this statute goes on to say that an impermissible gift may be donated to a governmental entity or a qualified nonprofit. So let's say you get a gift that you're not supposed to get. What you can do, if you don't take it back or you don't want to give it back, is you can turn around and give it to a nonprofit, like a real nonprofit, not one that you made up, it's just your kids, but like a real, like Goodwill, or to a governmental entity. So you could donate it to the city, right? So I've seen city council members get like fancy $300 jerseys, from the sports team that's just relocated in town. And they either have to give those back, give them to a nonprofit, or frame them and put them in city hall. You can't just wear them around.
All right, now my question is,
Okay,
when you go to TML conference,
right.
we-
The swag?
how is that?
Oh, wait, so what do you mean that?
Texas Municipal League
Who are you
conference,
getting stuff from?
when you're getting from all the vendors and stuff, and if the city has hired one of those vendors, and then they're given, so how does
Does
TML?
that happen at TML?
No, not at all. But I was
Okay.
just curious, I mean, with all this, how does TML fit in there?
To add on to that question,
Okay.
hypothetically, let's say a city has a request for qualifications for a new engineering firm,
Right,
okay? And there's been dozens of applicants.
right.
There's no decisions made, and one would imagine that most of those people would be at a conference like TML.
Right.
What would the council members and staff that go to a conference like that, what would they need to do or not do?
Well, let's go to the next one. This is exceptions to the gift prohibition. All right, so on this slide, what you can write out next to the side is, what can I take? Right? This is what everybody really wants to know. What can I take? Okay, you can take a legitimate fee for service. That's not an improper gift. What does that mean? That means if you're the mayor and a CPA and someone hires you to do their tax return, that's okay, right? If you're on P&Z and you own a landscaping company, someone can hire you to landscape their property. That's okay. That's the business that you're in, right? If I'm a lawyer on city council and someone hires me to do their wills, okay, I can do that. So that's a legitimate fee for service. That's not going to get you in trouble. If you have a prior existing relationship with that person, so let's say it's your buddy and y'all go hunting every year on opening weekend, and you've done it for 20 years, and now your buddy's an electrical contractor and you're on city council, can he still take you to the hunting lease, to his lease or to his cabin? Well, if that is something that represents a prior existing relationship that you've had, then you can continue that practice. Okay?
But could you vote on this contract?
Could you vote on this contract? You don't have a substantial business interest, so then you probably would be okay voting on this contract, legal.
I was taking the perception that
You can always recuse yourself even if you don't have to, right? You can always sort of take the high road and be cautious, but I don't think you would have to recuse yourself. Campaign contributions, the mayor asked about this. That's not an improper gift if it's given to your campaign and you report it lawfully. You report on your campaign report. Okay, item valued at less than $50. What do they give away at TML? What do the engineering firms give away at TML? What's in the swag bag?
Pad, paper, and pen, and just junk.
Just junk, probably, and you know why it's junk and not something nice?
Because it's
Because of this, right? Because they can't give away, you're not supposed to provide public servants with something that's worth more than $50. So that's why you give bags of junk at TML. I was at a TML type deal, one of those seminars where there's tons of vendors and they're giving away junk. And and this colleague of mine was there, and he was just sweeping like every table, all this stuff. I said, it was embarrassing, and he just put it in there, and he said, I said, what are you doing? And he said, oh, this is how, this is a good idea. He said, this is for the grandkids' pinatas. And so in his house, the grand birthdays, the pinata is full of TML junk. That's what's in it. So the kids hit it, and like highlighters come out and Post-it notes, and they go crazy for it. So he was just scooping it all up for his pinata. Okay. Can't be cash. You can never accept cash. Okay. So we'll go back to that. You can take. Here's another TML related deal, right? Because there's always somebody that wants to take you to dinner at TML. You can take food and meals and entertainment, so that could be like a concert ticket or rodeo or whatever, if it's accepted as a guest. Now, or that could be a sporting event. So how backwards is that, right? If I have 2 tickets to the play or something, I can go to the mayor, and the mayor say, hey, can my wife and I have those tickets? I said, no, but I can take you. How much fun is that, right? They would rather go with me to the play and listen to me go, oh, law firm's awesome. Or trying to sell them something the whole time. But that's what the law doesn't want people that are subject to a public service jurisdiction giving them travel, entertainment, food, right? I can't just say, yeah, go to the Four Seasons and put it on my tab. I have to be there, right? It has to be accepted as a guest to be legal, which really is kind of backwards, I think, because it forces the regulator and the regulated person to hang out on it. But that's the law. That's what it says. So let's say that so remember for about 50, it's got to be less than $50. So is a $50 item okay? $50 item acceptable? No. $49.99? $49.99 acceptable? Yes, less than $50. So what I'm going to do is give everybody on city council a $50 gift card to Chili's. What is that?
Right.
That's a bribe.
I don't expect them to do anything. It's just a gift. It's a gift. So, but is it a permissible gift? Is it worth less than $50?
No.
No. Okay, so it's not that. Is it food?
Yes.
Well, yes.
Do I have to be there with it? Is it food? Is a gift card food?
Oh, it could be drink.
Yeah. Oh, it
Could be merchandise.
An alcohol sticker.
Well, alcohol's food. I hope we can all agree on that. So, but do I have to go with them? Is it food? Or is it just a gift card? Okay, let me ask you this. Is it cash?
No.
Yes, it is a type of cash.
Yes, awesome.
It is a type of cash.
How?
Because when
Go ahead.
you take the card, you are actually buying something with the card, which is,
But will Chili's give you cash back?
No.
I don't know, if you know somebody in Chili's, they will.
So I used to think, I've kind of changed my way of thinking on this, because I used to think, well, that's not cash, right? It's not a cash equivalent, because you can't get cash back for it, and you can't use it anywhere else. But lo and behold, I can't remember the name of the site, but there's this thing called the internet. And on the internet is a site where you can go sell your gift card and sell it and you won't get the face value. So if you can take my $50 Chili's card and you can go to this website, I can't remember what it's called, but you can get like $43 back for it. So people will buy these things. So really it is kind of a cash equivalent, right? So I don't know what that means. I mean, I'm nervous about, I think gift cards, I used to think they were interesting because I couldn't really tell you what they are. Now I'm worried that they're cash and you shouldn't be taking them. So I think that's the very, very cautious advice, is that they have a cash value and they have a cash equivalent.
See, I may know that because my husband's an engineer,
Yeah.
and the state engineering board, they are not allowed, they're not allowed $50, they're allowed less than that, and they're not allowed gift cards at all.
I think the gift cards, you can redeem them for cash. You won't get the face value, but you will get, more than half. So it's an interesting deal. So that's what you can take. I'd be very careful about the gift cards. And if it's gonna be food, then you have to go with the person who has to be the guest. All right, questions about that? Yes, sir.
So let's say that you go to a restaurant or bar and they say, oh, we want a complimentary meal. Okay, that would be a violation, right? Because
Well-
they're not sitting with you, they're not
Who wants a copy meal?
the owner of the bar or whatever.
Is it in your city?
Yes,
That's interesting. So it is someone that's subject to your jurisdiction because y'all do zoning and building
Right.
permits and all.
and not even, let's say it's someone on the P&Z.
Well, conceivably, it's someone that's subject to your jurisdiction.
Right.
We shouldn't.
So,
So then the question is, were they with you? Were you their guest? And that's what the law says, is that they need to be in your presence.
so they would need to sit at your table,
Well,
not
that's
just.
a good, now you're asking the right kind of question. Right. Do they have to sit at your table?
I would think so.
I think that's the safest thing to do. It's kind of
I would
creepy if
think
you're
it's
over
just-
there going, waiting at you. Just be close enough to pay, but
Yeah, I just
you
think it's
don't
wrong to
want
accept anything. Yeah.
No, so this is why it gets complicated. And so what's the penalty? The penalty is the class A misdemeanor. And then you get back into, well, okay. How, are you good friends with your district attorney or not? These things come into play. All right, there you go. What's next? Yeah, I'll do this one real fast. Misuse of official information. This is also a felony. This is the penal code. So be aware of this. If you have information that comes into your possession by virtue of your official status and it has not been made available to the public, then it is a felony for a public servant to release that information or use that information in a way to help somebody or harm somebody. So the example I like to use is for, like, say, an economic development deal where there's a big prospect coming to town, you want to lure away this big tech company from Sacramento or wherever, and so you know about it because you're on city council and it's very exciting, but nobody else knows about it. But your spouse is a realtor, you say, and you know that this prospect wants to go over here at the corner of, I-10 and I always think about when I worked at City Caterpillar was the big deal we did, right? And so the people that knew Caterpillar was coming with a small group of people that they're going to build at 46 and I-10. So let's say that you're on the city council and you know this, and you tell your spouse who's a realtor, man, you don't say anything, you don't tell her anything, you just say, you know where I think it's going to be real hot in the near future is the corner of intersection Highway 46. You might want to check that out. So is that an improper disclosure of confidential information?
Yes.
Right, so it's done to help somebody else, right? So economic development situations are where this comes into play more. That's where I've seen it the most. So just be aware that it's out there. You also have a corresponding deal in your ethics ordinance. Okay, thanks. Yeah, we'll keep going. That's all the penal code stuff. Let's talk about your city council ethics ordinance. Here's who it applies to. City officials, and that means council members, city manager, assistant city manager, who I noted is not here, department heads, city secretary, municipal judge, city attorney, and boards and commission members. Okay, that's who's caught by your ethics ordinance. All right, next. All right, so let's just talk about the general categories. Support of colleagues is the first thing that you're obligated to do. And they want you to strive to support and enhance the credibility of your colleagues, share your knowledge and expertise with your colleagues, provide information to aid in sound decision making, exercise discretion in the use of confidential information provided by your colleagues. So this is yet another, and that's another value that really nobody shouted out. That's okay. Is confidentiality, right? That's kind of a part of loyalty. Is that if you have confidential information, you need to maintain that. And so not only is it in the state statute, but it's also in a couple places in your ethics ordinance. Recognize each other's work. This is basically the play nice with your neighbors rule, right? Notify your colleagues of pressing queries that may impact them, like a reporter does about them. And don't degrade or harm your colleagues in the press. Don't say nasty things in the newspaper about your colleagues. Be civilized. How's that? All right, what's next? All right, acceptance of gratuity. So this is sort of a local take on the gift prohibition. And this basically is the bribery statute restated, right? Do not solicit, right? Don't ask for and don't accept from any source, any gift, favor, service, or thing of value in exchange for the exercise of your official discretion. Okay, so same thing as the bribery statute, we'll put it codified level. All right, next. Misuse of city resources. No city official shall knowingly use the city properties, facilities, personnel, equipment, or supplies, or use any confidential information, there's that again, for private financial gain. Okay, so this is also kind of a corollary of the confidential information state law. All right, but also don't use, and there's a state law on that too that we didn't talk about, but it's about misusing public equipment or public facilities for financial gain. So it's just reiterated here in your local ordinance. Conducting commercial transactions. This is sort of your local conflict of interest rule. No city official shall knowingly be an interested party to any exchange, purchase, or sale of property, goods, or services to the city. All right, so you can't be a contractor with the city. All right, you can't agree to sell things to the city or do any services for the city if you are a city official. That's pretty straightforward. Don't enter into any contract with the city. And then it says, except in full and impartial compliance with all applicable laws, which I don't really know how you reconcile the two. But I think the safe advice is, the ordinance says, don't be a contractor with the city if you're a public official. So just don't. All right. All right. Representation of conflicting interests in legal proceedings. City official may not represent any person or entity in criminal proceeding, including municipal court. All right. So that means if you're on city council or you're on a board, you can't go like start taking cases in municipal court. Okay. Instituted by a city officer or employee acting in their official capacity, or where a city officer or employee is a witness. So why is that? What do you think the policy behind that is? They don't want you to do anything in a case where the city employee is a witness or the one charging the offense, right? Because it would put, what would that do? Yeah, the undue influence. It would put the city employee in a bad position if they're in an antagonistic or adversarial relationship or scenario with the city council member. So imagine this, that let's say you had a criminal defense lawyer on city council who was taking cases in county, let's just say county court, and cross-examining Buda PD officers about the way they do their job. Under this, and that means in some cities that happens, right? So you have a criminal defense lawyer on city council who sets up police department budget, is in charge of personnel things, may hear appeals from disciplinary matters, and then their day job is cross-examining officers in criminal court, right? Can you see how that would be a problem for the city, for the police officer that work for the city? So that's why this is in place to prevent that kind of thing. Go ahead. All right. Come on in. Are you in the right place? We're just getting to the good stuff. All right. So disclosure of personal financial interest and abstention from voting. So this is this is analogous to the local government code, chapter 171 we talked about, right? Disclose and abstain. But I think it's stricter, and so this is worth noting. Because remember what we talked about, we didn't dwell on a lot, but in the state law, 10%, right? How do you know whether you have a substantial interest in the business? What are the ways?
10%, $15,000 for real property value, $25,000.
That's right. So either you own 10% or 10% of your salary comes from $2,500 in real property or $15,000 fair market value. Well, look at what your city one says. Any city official having a personal financial interest, direct or indirect. Now, I'm hard pressed to tell you what an indirect financial interest is. I mean, I can probably make up something, but that's pretty broad. So that could mean something that your child has a financial interest. I'm not sure what that means. But a direct or indirect financial interest in a matter coming before the city council shall disclose the interest and abstain from voting. So, no 10% rule like you have in state law. Any interest, okay? And an indirect interest, whatever that means. So I think that you are being held to a higher standard by your local ethics ordinance than by the local government code. Which is okay, right? And home rule cities have the authority to impose stricter guidelines on their employees or public officials than state law does. They just can't impose, they can't water them down, but they can certainly do them up. Okay, and that's, I think, what has happened here. All right? Which really, this kind of helps, this is better for you. I think if I'm on city council, well, I only have a 9% ownership interest, big deal. This is much easier for you to say, look, I'm out, right? And it's okay. It's okay to have a conflict of interest as long as you handle it right. All right. Questions about that? Okay. Award or bid of contracts to employing certain former city officials. So this is like a little local revolving door statute that basically says you can award a contract, and this is the city council I'm talking about. City council cannot approve a contract or bid to any company that has, within the last 6 months, hired a city public official who has left within the last 6 months. Okay, so this is to prevent city council from awarding the contract. Basically, like if someone leaves the city council and gets hired as a consultant to help a vendor get the gig. You say, oh yeah, we'll hire you. You just got off city council. They all like you and help us get that contract. And so this is put in place to prevent that. Okay? I've never seen it happen. Maybe something prompted this way back when. I don't know. Yes, sir.
Does that eliminate the vendor, or does that eliminate the participation of the former council member?
It eliminates the vendor. The way that it's written, it says the city council cannot approve a contract to a company that's retained in the last 6 months, someone who's left council in the last 6 months. So, yeah, they're out of the running for the contract. All right, next. All right, so what's the punishment, right? That's always part of, so the way that to look at these ethics ordinances or any kind of ethical standard of conduct, usually there's 3 parts. There's some sort of statement of values, and y'all did a great job of listing the values. And so those are your values, those should be your guiding principles. Then you got all the rules, right? And the rules are there to try to implement the values. And then finally, you got enforcement. So what is the enforcement for those rules to be meaningful? And so for the ethics ordinance, there's not a lot you can do. You can't remove somebody from office, but you can censure them and you can reprimand them. And I've seen a school board and a water district in the last 6 months reprimand and censure one of their board members. And it is just painful to watch. It's like being in middle school.
One of the University of Chancellor
That too, yeah, the UT system, it's just awful to watch. But that's the way that these things are enforced. A violation of any of the standards set out in the ethics ordinance may result in censure by the city council. If the city official charged with violation of the ordinance is a council member, the vote to censure must be unanimously approved by the remaining city council members. So, I think that it's also false to city council to impose those sanctions on the other board members of the city. Right? Ultimately, it's up to the city council to enforce its ordinance and to hold people accountable for violating. That'll never happen here. I know, because nobody's ever going to do anything wrong. All right. All right, open government. We're going to write this. We're required to. The Open Meetings Act. Has everybody watched? Everybody done the boring Attorney General thing? Raise your hand if you did that. Okay. The one with the cheesy violins in between everything. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. But we don't have cheesy violins in this. Let's go to the next one. All right. Public Information Act. Remember, it covers all forms of information: paper information, electronic documents, everything. It includes information that relates to the transaction of public business. Even now, the laws have been clarified. Even if it's on your personal electronic device, if it's from your personal Gmail account, if it relates to the transaction of public business, the AG is going to consider it public information. They don't care what device it's on.
Should you, if you get any kind of traffic questions like, why are we doing this, and you respond to that, should you forward that whole conversation to your city account?
It doesn't matter, really. I mean, it's public information. Will be easy, if someone ever asks for it, it will be easier to turn over if it's forwarded to your city account. So do you want it to be easily turned over? I mean, that's the real hard part on the enforcement deal of this, is if the city gets a Public Information Act request for all your emails, and we only have access to your city emails, we say, well, give us your personal emails too. And you say, what do I do then? So, yeah, so this is where this stuff gets difficult, is in the enforcement of how do you go get something from the council member's personal email address. But the AG will say, you gotta turn it over if it relates to the transaction of the business. All right, our requester's motives are off limits. So if a requester says, I want this document, first of all, let's talk about that. You can make, and you should make, someone filing a Public Information Act request, put it in writing, okay? And you should date stamp it, and you should calendar the 10-day deadline, which is that you have 10 days to submit it to the Attorney General's office. Make them put it in writing. Don't ask them why they want it. You can ask them for clarifying questions. Do you want this? Would you be happy with this? Can I redact this? But you can't ask them, why do you want this? You're prohibited from doing that. And they'll turn around and file a complaint against you at the Attorney General's office if you ask them, what are you up to? All right. So criminal penalties. And then it says you have to produce it promptly. So what does that mean?
Produce what?
You have to produce responsive information promptly.
Depends on who you are.
10 business.
Huh?
10 business days.
10 business days is how long you have to seek an AG opinion. I think that most city secretaries or public information officers will tell you within 10 days is promptly. And most requesters will tell you that's not prompt enough, right? So there's not a lot of guidance out there, but you have to produce it promptly. What if there's 30,000 pages of documents? What's prompt, right? And so you can charge. There are, the AG has schedules for how much you can charge. You charge 10 cents a page for, copies, whatever it is, 20 cents for color copies, and then for DVDs you charge $1, and then you can charge for manipulation of data. So there are some ways to recoup your costs, but you have certain deadlines for notifying the requester. You go to the next one. And there's criminal penalties for withholding or destroying information. All right, so we talked about this. Cities should require that it be in writing, date stamp it. You're not required to create new documents, okay? So if a requester says, give me a list of blah, 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 you don't have to create a list if that list doesn't exist, okay?
Ross,
Yes, sir.
you have some public information and someone takes it home, can you still get access to it? Like some paperwork or documents.
Like if I took it home or what?
If a council member took it.
Well, what the statute says, public information is something that a government body possesses or has control over or access to. So I think if a council member takes something home, it's still public information because the city has access to it. It's like, as your attorney, you can't just give me stuff and I take it to my office and now, I'm sorry, we don't have it. Because really you have access to it through me.
Okay.
Okay, you can charge expenses, yes, sir.
Are public information request forms subject to the Public Information Act?
Is a public information request form subject to the PIA? Yes. You'll see people, I don't know, newspapers or others say, I want to see all the PIA. You see a lot of procurement stuff like at state agencies where they say, I want to see every PIA you received in the last 6 months.
Just to see who is asking?
Who's asking for stuff?
Do they have to do that?
They have to do that. And some places like the University of Texas system, they put all theirs up online. They have you can go see every PIA request that's filed. They put it up online, you go click on it and see a copy of the request. And then when they provide responsive documents, they put that up next to it. So, okay. You can charge, what do you charge for?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So if a city were to do that, or the entity do that and put it online,
Right.
is the prompt giving them the information just to say, go to our website?
That's a good
Or do
question.
they?
That's a good
do they have
question.
different copies?
If it's precisely the same information that's being sought, it's, then I think you can say, go to our website. We produced it previously, it's on our website. But if it's something different, I think you probably have to And the other thing is that they're allowed to come inspect it too, so they have some discretion as to how they view that information. You might say, well, we make a copy of this $4,000. And I said, well, how much to come look at it? Well, nothing, right? You can come look at it. And they have the right to do that. Okay, so there's certain things that you can, let's see, improperly destroying public information is a criminal violation. The requester or the Attorney General may file suit against an entity that's violating the PNA. And ongoing violations may result in daily. Okay, that's the enforcement. There are certain things now that you can just black out. You can redact without having to ask the AG's permission. Those are social security numbers, vehicle information like VINs, vehicle ID numbers, and license plate numbers, driver's license numbers, anything basic relating to the operation of the motor vehicle, and private email addresses. All those things you can redact. For other information, the city has to get the AG's permission to withhold the public disclosure. And if the AG comes back and says, no, you got to turn it over, and you don't agree, then what the city has to do is they have to sue the Attorney General in order to keep that stuff confidential. So what is accepted from public disclosure? What can remain private? Law enforcement records, not all law enforcement records, but if they relate to an ongoing investigation or ongoing prosecution. Health or medical records can be confidential. Security documents, like the security codes, or location of cameras, stuff like that. Bank account numbers are, so like if somebody says, I want a copy of every check or direct deposit slip that was sent, for employees, then you'd have to remove you could remove the bank account numbers or the routing numbers from those. Economic development documents, we talked about that as it relates to that meeting stuff. Police officers can ask for their family information, basically information showing whether or not they're married or have kids, and home address to be confidential. And so usually when you hire a new officer, you give them the opportunity to keep that confidential. Did I get that right, Kristen? Yeah. All right, confidential legal advice can be withheld. Deliberative work process, so that might be like drafts going back and forth. Maybe not, wouldn't necessarily be legal advice, but anything that reflects kind of policy-making decision can be withheld with permission, and then competitive bidding information. So the general rule of thumb on procurement is that everybody turns in, so let's say you go out for bid to build a road or whatever, the contractors turn it in with their bids, and they say, oh, we can do it this way because we have the super secret mix or whatever. They can assert that that's confidential. But generally, once the contract's been awarded, all that information is public. Okay, all the losing bids basically are public. All right, what's next? All right, so now we're talking about open meetings, right? So any questions about public information? Email, any of that stuff? Okay. Now we're going to shift gears into the open meetings, all right? All meetings are open to the public, true or false?
True.
All right, good. That is a presumption that we start with in the law, that all meetings are open to the public. Why is that? What value are we trying to transparency? Very good.
But if it's illegal, real estate, any of those.
Right, so there are some exceptions to that the general openness, and we're going to talk about those. So a meeting is a deliberation of public business by a forum of the body. So think about how many people are on your board. A quorum discussing board business is considered a meeting. Okay, so let's talk about the meetings. Citizens have a right to be at the meetings, right? I get this one all the time. Do citizens have the right to place an item on the agenda? No. Do citizens have a right to speak?
Yes.
No, there's no right in the Open Meetings Act for them to speak.
Even though they fill out a comment form?
Well, yeah, every entity I deal with provides an opportunity to speak. And usually what I've seen generally among public entities is they will always have in the regular meetings an opportunity to be heard by the public. But I know some that will not have that if it's a special meeting. So at a special meeting, they will not have citizens comment section. They're not obligated to.
Citizens can listen, but it's gonna.
That's right, they don't have a right to speak. Now, having said that, right, every city council I deal with has a citizens to be heard portion at the beginning, or I've seen some move it to the end, which is just sort of like, you know, not very much. But most have it at the beginning, and that way you can get up and people can sign up and people can speak. And then you have some discretion as to how you want to do it. They can get up and talk about anything, right? And what if it's not on the agenda, and you're sitting up here, and somebody gets up and says, I'm mad about this, it's not on the agenda, what can you do? Nothing, right, you're not supposed to, because it's not on the agenda, and you shouldn't be deliberating about it. Now,
Can't you ask that be put on a future agenda?
you can ask them to put it on a future agenda. The city manager can say, well, the policy in the city is, and make a policy statement. So you can do some stuff, you can say, this is the policy of the city, we'll put it on the next agenda, but you can't have a deliberation about something that somebody brings up from the microphone during citizens' comments. Okay? Because the public's not on notice, that's the point, is the public didn't know you were going to be talking about that. And then, you know, you can do, I think like y'all do here, you also let people talk at each agenda item about that particular agenda item, which is good practice, I think, because then people can they can use the beginning citizens to be heard as just their, chance to say what's on their mind, and then later on kind of contribute to the topic at hand as each particular item comes up. And that's, when you do it that way, people feel heard, which I think is important.
So this is why we have like on an agenda, the public comment.
Public comment
Yeah.
time, yes.
But technically, a body does not have to have the public comment. Wow.
Good luck with that.
That's
I don't recommend that you do that. All right. All right, so what are the exceptions? There are exceptions to what is a meeting? A social gathering is not a meeting. The TML event that you talked about, right? Educational seminars are not meetings. Those don't have to be posted. Those don't have to have, notice put on the website or on City Hall. So there are exceptions to what constitutes a meeting. So when can you have a closed meeting? When can you meet an executive session? Tell me.
Legal advice?
Real estate,
Personnel.
economic development,
Legal.
and legal advice.
Those are the big ones. Personnel, real estate, economic development, legal. Yeah? Okay, so I think that's right. There's some other ones like security related stuff, but it's stuff you never really see. Those are the big ones. So let's say you're gonna meet to discuss. Can you discuss a class of employees in closed session? Like, let's just talk about all the cops. No. Right. You gotta talk about one. Yeah, it's a personnel review. So we're going to talk about the duties, compensation, and performance of the deputy police chief. Right? That's what we do. So you have to do it that way because guess who holds the trump card in that situation? The employee, right? The employee can force you to have that conversation in public. So they need to be notified, they're going to be discussed, and then it's up to them as to whether or not they want to allow it to happen. Now, they don't necessarily get to be in there. You can go in there and meet and talk about it, and they don't have to be in there, but they can force you to come out here and talk about it. Okay?
Should language be that specific, Ross, deputy police chief, or can you just say personnel issues?
I think that you should give some indication as to who you're talking, the public officer that you're talking about, because I think that the officer is probably entitled. But I don't think you have to have their name on it. I think you have to have their title. Is the best practice. Okay, and for meeting with your legal counsel, it can do with pending litigation or threat litigation, or it can do with anything where the legal advice needs to be confidential. Okay. Contracts are the tricky ones, right? Contracts you can talk about legal issues, but you can't really negotiate a contract in closed session. Yes, sir.
How much notice do they have to give if they want to make that a public conversation, that person?
Personnel, like on the personnel thing? That's a good question. How much notice does the personnel, they have a right to have it in public. So I think they could go, not, I want to assert my right, they'll get out here and have it in public. I've never seen it happen, but I think it could happen that way. All All right, so notice of meeting, you gotta have the agenda, it's gotta be at 72 hours before the meeting, gotta be, let's say, City Hall on the city's website. Should say when it's gonna be, where it's gonna be, that it's the city council, or is it DVOA, which board is meeting, right, the PZ, and then each item would be discussed. And then if you're gonna have a closed session, executive session, it needs to be listed on there and which one you're going to utilize, all right? So council may meet in closed session to discuss these things that we talked about. Yeah, we'll go to the next one, Larry, cover that. And remember, you have to meet in a public setting first, so you have to convene in public and then announce that you're going into closed session and why you're going into closed session. Can you vote in closed session? No. Please don't do that. All votes have to be taken in public session, right? All right, out in public. So, criminal penalties or enforcement of the act. Conspiracy to circumvent the Open Meetings Act is a class. So here's the deal. I had a client 2 weeks ago where a developer said, so you can't conspire to circumvent the act by meeting in groups that are less than 4. That's what the law says, okay? So you can't say, we meet 2 and 2 and 2 and talk about it. So I had a client like 2 weeks ago, who was a developer that was a big development in the middle of town. And he says, I'm gonna go meet with each council member one-on-one. I'm doing that so you don't get in trouble. We're gonna do that so we can work around this Open Meetings Act deal. Well, that's just like admitting that you're trying to circumvent the act. You don't say that. I'm meeting with you so we don't circumvent the act, or, so we don't violate the act. Wink, wink. But guess what? He doesn't care because there's no criminal violation for the developer. The only penalties are for the members of the governing body, right, for the public officials. Well, he can have that meeting. You're the one that's going to get in trouble, not him. So we had to tell the council, back up, don't do that. And he said, no, it's cool. I already met with 3 people. We said, then really don't do it. Because if he's already met with 3 people, now you're like, you're patient 0. You don't want to be that person that puts it over the quorum. That's back they had like 6 people in their council. So we had to tell him, and he got really mad. He threatened to sue our law firm for giving advice to our client that he didn't like. And it was ugly. He said, I want to meet, you tell them I can meet with them by Friday or we're suing you. So that didn't happen. But, so it's, members of the public can't get in trouble for this. It's just those of you that, have agreed to public service that can get in trouble. So that's one, circumventing the act is a criminal violation. Participating in an illegal closed session. Conducting a closed meeting without a tape or certified agenda. What do we do here? Tape, certified agenda? So when you go in closed session, you can be doing one of 2 things. Either somebody has to write it down and type up the certified agenda, or you run the tape recorder. I think it's cleaner to do the certified agenda, and then that document is maintained by the city secretary, and it can't be disclosed without a judicial order. Okay? If you disclose it without a judicial order, it's another violation.
What happens to the council that doesn't do either one of those?
It's that thing right there. It's conducting a closed meeting without a tape recorder or certified agenda. But a certified agenda is pretty minimal. It says, we met in closed session, we discussed confidential legal matters, I swear this is true, and then that's it. I mean, it doesn't take much to satisfy that.
That's what we use.
Certified?
Yeah.
It's a misdemeanor. That is a certified agenda?
Yeah, that's what we use.
And that's better. That's better than having tapes floating around out there, I think.
Does that have to be signed by someone? We met in closed session,
It's usually signed by the city secretary.
so the city secretary is in there?
Well, no, they don't have to, it can be signed by anybody that's in there, actually. It didn't have to be certified by the city secretary. I think the city secretary is usually the repository that safeguards the certified agendas. Okay, if you take action in violation, like you vote on something, award a contract, and it was at an illegal meeting, that's potentially can be undone, right? That can be avoided. So that's one of the consequences. Now, importantly, reliance upon a written legal opinion is a defense of prosecution. So, if you're in doubt, ask your legal counsel to write you something. It doesn't have to be typed, it doesn't have to be on paper, it just has to be written. So, you know, if someone's out there saying, well, you can't go into closed session on that, and your attorney says, yes, you can, I'll write you out an opinion, then that's a defensive prosecution, and that absolves everybody on the city council if you're acting on the written advice of your legal counsel. Okay? All right, what's next? That's all just in time for the big finish. That's really all we have to cover tonight. The bottom line, and so think back, when you think about this, think back to the values that we talked about at the beginning, and focus on those and try to think, okay, why do these rules exist and what value are we trying to promote? And then when you look at these standards, that's the other thing is, let's use these rules, let's kind of all agree that we're going to use these rules as the floor, and then, you know, aim a little bit higher maybe than the rules. You don't have to go exactly by the rules. They're there as a minimum, and so when in doubt, aim a little higher, and probably everybody will be fine, and this won't be an issue. So I'm happy to answer questions. That was not as long as I thought, and I appreciate your attention.